Imagine you're sitting across from someone who says they love you. Their eyes are soft. Their smile is warm. But something feels off. You can't explain it. It's not what they said, it's what they didn't. It's not how they touched you. It's what they were taking when they did. You try to brush it off. You tell yourself it's nothing. That love is complicated. That maybe you're just overthinking again. But then, it happens again. And again. Each time you give more. They seem to need less. Each time you open yourself, you feel more alone. And each time, you wonder, why does something that's supposed to be mutual feel so asymmetrical? Why does affection, in its rawest form, begin to feel like a transaction? Now imagine this pattern isn't just personal, it's philosophical, timeless, woven into the very structure of what love has meant for millennia. Now imagine that one man, long before Tinder, therapy culture, or Instagram Reels, dared to name what others wouldn't even whisper. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer. He didn't flinch, he didn't romanticize, he didn't soften his words to be liked. In fact, he didn't care if you hated him. What he wanted was clarity. What he offered was discomfort. Because Schopenhauer wasn't here to affirm your ideals, he was here to ruin them. If it meant you'd finally see the truth hiding behind the veil. And what was that truth? That what we call love is often not love at all. That what we think is devotion might be nothing more than biological strategy. That the creature you idealize, woman, in Schopenhauer's view is not an angel, not a muse, not the better half of man's soul, but something far more primal, more calculating, more rooted in nature's cold, mechanical design. He called it out, the romantic delusion, the pedestal, the worship. He exposed the paradox that while man dreams of transcendence through love, woman remains tethered to the earth, to the species, to reproduction, and that this difference is not accidental. It is essential, evolutionary, inevitable, and yet you keep forgetting, even now, even after heartbreaks that felt like extinction events, even after watching your deepest vulnerability be met with quiet indifference. You still long, you still hope, you still chase the myth that one day someone will arrive and finally make it all make sense. But what if the myth is the problem? What if your longing has been hijacked by a fiction dressed up as virtue? What if your pain isn't proof that love is hard, but that it was never what you thought it was to begin with? This isn't about hating women. That's the lazy misreading. Schopenhauer wasn't bitter. He was brutal, brutally honest. He looked at nature and saw not romance, but necessity. He looked at man's devotion to woman and saw not beauty, but bewitchment. And then he asked the most dangerous question of all: what if woman isn't what you want, but what your species needs you to want? Let that sit, because suddenly, what felt like intimacy starts to look like instinct. What felt like heartbreak starts to look like programming. And what you thought was your soul's greatest desire begins to resemble your biology's greatest trap. Do you feel the shift? It's subtle at first. A discomfort in your gut, a tension behind the eyes, a resistance not to the logic, but to what it implies. Because if Schopenhauer was right, if woman is not the gateway to fulfillment, but the guardian of survival, then what does that make you? What does that make love? What does that make the songs, the poems, the promises? And more importantly, what else have you mistaken for truth simply because it felt good to believe? That is the rupture. That is the reason so few read Schopenhauer today, and even fewer dare to agree, not because he was wrong, but because he was too right, too early. So now, the real question: Are you willing to look deeper past the seduction, past the shame, past even your own desires to see what's actually driving them? Because the next part of this journey isn't about her. It's about you, your mind, your blindness, and the forces you never knew were shaping everything you felt. Let's go there. There's a hidden theater behind your eyes. Every time you meet someone new, every time your heart races, every time you feel that pull, the one that feels spiritual but acts biological, something else is writing the script. You believe it's you, that your preferences are yours, that your longing is sacred. But what if it isn't? What if your desire is inherited? What if the roles you keep playing were cast before you were even born? Arthur Schopenhauer didn't just question love, he dissected it. And when he placed woman under his microscope, what he saw was not romance, but reproduction. Not fairness, but function. He saw a woman not as the complement to man, but as the vessel of nature's will. And nature, in Schopenhauer's view, doesn't care about your happiness. It cares about one thing: continuity. He wrote, love is merely the conscious manifestation of the will to life. In other words, what you call falling in love is the will of the species using you as a puppet, and woman, she is the gatekeeper, the evaluator, the one whose instincts are wired not for mutual flourishing, but for selective propagation. In her, nature concentrates its agenda, and that's the crack most men never see. Because society modern, romantic, post-Freudian has elevated woman to goddesshood. She is the prize, the meaning, the one who gives man access to his own heart. But Schopenhauer peeled back the curtain and found something colder: woman as strategy. Woman as the calculated executor of survival's design. And where does that leave man? Trapped, conditioned, told to impress, to provide, to protect. Not for the sake of virtue, but because that's what it takes to be selected. Man's heroism, Schopenhauer suggested, may not be heroic at all. It may be biologically performative, a subconscious audition for inclusion in the next generation. But let's go deeper. Because Schopenhauer didn't stand alone in this critique. Carl Jung, the explorer of archetypes and the unconscious, also saw woman as a psychic phenomenon far more complex than surface attraction. To Jung, the anima was the internal feminine, a projection of man's unintegrated soul. When you fall in love, you're not seeing the other person clearly. You're seeing yourself, fragmented and idealized, mirrored back through her. So imagine the trap nature programs your biology. The unconscious projects your anima. Culture hands you romantic mythology, and you believe it's real. Do you see now you were never choosing her? You were being chosen by forces you didn't understand: evolutionary, psychological, mythological, forces that wrote the script, handed you the costume, and told you, go win her love. Your life depends on it. And in some ways, it did. At least, your lineage did. But the cost of this deception is staggering. Because when a man identifies with his biology, when he confuses projection for presence, when he chases the anima in a woman, instead of integrating her within, he lives in a dream. A beautiful, terrible dream that ends not in union, but in disillusionment. Friedrich Nietzsche knew this pain intimately. He once said, women. They make the highs higher and the lows more frequent. Nietzsche, like Schopenhauer, loved clarity more than comfort. He saw woman not as evil, but as unreachable, not because she is bad, but because man never sees her as she is. He sees what he needs her to be. He worships her, and then blames her for not living up to the fantasy. And here, we encounter the real problem, not woman herself, but man's delusion. A delusion so ancient, so embedded, that even your suffering seems noble. You say, she broke me. But did she, or did your illusion about her finally collapse? Aldous Huxley once warned facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. And the fact is, this nature uses your emotions against you. It makes lust feel like love. It makes insecurity feel like longing. It makes projection feel like destiny. And in this hall of mirrors, you lose sight of truth, of self, of what love could actually be if it weren't enslaved to evolution's machinery. But there's more. Because not only is this deception ancient, it's being amplified. Modern society, under the guise of liberation and empowerment, has intensified the biological imbalance, where once you had rituals, structure, and clarity of roles, now you have ambiguity, expectation inflation, and algorithmic seduction. And men, they're more confused than ever, told to be strong, but not too strong, vulnerable, but not weak, chivalrous, but not patriarchal. And beneath it all, the old script still plays, win her, prove yourself, be desirable, be enough. But enough for what, and enough for whom? That's the question you're never supposed to ask, because once you do, the whole illusion starts to shake. And that's dangerous. Because if Schopenhauer was right, if the entire architecture of romantic longing is built on nature's indifference, then every heartbreak you've ever had wasn't betrayal, it was biology. So what now? Do you sink into cynicism? Do you hate what you once loved? Or do you go deeper still into the unseen structures that have shaped your life and begin the slow, painful, liberating process of seeing through them? That's where we go next. Because once you see the hidden game, you begin to notice its consequences in your relationships, in your sense of self, in the very way you define what it means to be a man. And once you see that there's no going back, you thought it was just heartbreak. You thought the pain you felt when she stopped texting back, when she ghosted you after the third date, when she slept beside you with dead eyes and a colder soul was personal, that it was about you, your worth, your effort, your failure. But it wasn't. It was the architecture breaking down. A structure you didn't even know you were inside of collapsing from the inside out. What you felt wasn't just grief. It was existential displacement, a shattering of the scaffolding that once held up your identity as a man. You thought you were building connection, but you were feeding a machine, a silent algorithm of instincts, biases, projections, and scripts passed down through millennia. The consequence. You don't know what's real anymore. You walk through the world and wonder, is this woman smiling because she sees me? Or because she senses my utility? Is this attraction authentic? Or is it manufactured by something beneath her awareness, her biology, her programming? Am I falling in love with her? Or with the dopamine cocktail nature floods my brain with when it wants me to pursue? These aren't just questions. They're fractures. They tear at the seams of your reality, and if you dig too deep, if you stare into them long enough, you begin to feel the real cost of centuries of delusion. You were never taught how to love, only how to perform for it, only how to earn what should never have been conditional. Let's step back. Schopenhauer believed that man's suffering lies in his slavery to the will of blind, ceaseless drive to continue existing. The will doesn't care about beauty, poetry, or meaning. It wants replication. It wants survival. And it uses everything, including woman, as a tool to achieve that. And so, when a man sees a woman, he doesn't just see her. He sees the potential end to his inner restlessness, a projected salvation, a doorway out of his pain. But it's a trap, because woman is not salvation. She is not villain either. She is just the mirror, a living symbol of the system man cannot see. And what happens when that mirror turns cold? What happens when? Despite all your efforts, you are not chosen. What happens when? Despite how deeply you feel, how much you sacrifice, how present you are. She leaves your mind, conditioned by evolutionary reward systems, spirals. It interprets rejection as annihilation, loss of reproductive access, death of legacy, death of meaning. You become depressed. You stop creating. You numb. You overcompensate with consumption of porn, of substances, of shallow validation, anything to mimic the lost surge of being wanted. And this isn't just you. It's everywhere. It's epidemic. Look at the rise in loneliness among men. Look at the suicide rates. Look at the millions of men silently watching their phones in the dark, hoping for a notification that never comes. This is not random. This is the consequence of a system that weaponized intimacy, made it conditional, made it a scarcity, a system that told men you are only worthy if she chooses you, and when she doesn't, your entire self-concept collapses, because it was never yours to begin with. It was outsourced to her validation, to her attention, to her body, to the projected Anima Jung warned you about. But here's the twist. Even when she does choose you, it still doesn't last, because you're not loving her. You're loving the high, the escape, the temporary stillness from the chaos inside. And when she fails to keep giving it, when she becomes human, inconsistent, unresponsive, you call it betrayal. But it's not betrayal. It's biology, doing what it always does, seeking novelty, efficiency, and genetic advantage. And here's the tragedy most men don't dare admit. Even when we win, we lose. Because no matter how beautiful she is, how perfect the first months feel, how intoxicating her presence becomes, there's always the lingering whisper, she doesn't really see me. She sees what I provide, what I represent. And one day, that won't be enough. You suppress this voice, but it grows louder, and it morphs into something darker: resentment, withdrawal, distrust. And now the cycle repeats. You chase, you project, you ache. She responds, she withdraws, she replaces, and somewhere deep down, a part of you dies. That part, it was your trust in something real, and once it's gone, so is your capacity to connect, not just with women, but with yourself. Because every illusion you projected onto her was also projected out of your own emptiness. The truth you were running from wasn't about her. It was about your own need for approval, for significance, for something to fill the silence inside you that you've never made peace with. The unseen consequence isn't just heartbreak, it's hollow identity. It's existential confusion. It's a life where your worth is outsourced, your agency is buried, and your desire is hijacked by invisible forces you still haven't named. But you can name them. And once you do, once you stop blaming her, stop hating yourself, and start seeing through the game, you realize something: you were never supposed to play this game in the first place. And now, you don't have to. You can rebel. But rebellion starts not with anger, not with ideology, but with vision, with a different kind of clarity, one that doesn't seek revenge or validation, but freedom. Let's talk about that next. Freedom does not come softly. It begins like a break, a fracture in the lens you've been using to see the world. Suddenly, the pedestal collapses. The illusion burns. What once looked like a goddess now reveals itself as a mirror, fragile, cracked, and reflecting not just her nature, but your misunderstanding. And in that moment, something rare happens. You stop blaming, not because you've forgiven, but because you finally understand. She was never the problem. Your belief was, You were taught that love was an ascent, that to win a woman's heart was to win peace, that through her you would be delivered, that her softness would soften your rage, that her body would sanctify your loneliness. But Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Jung, they all whispered the same forbidden truth: she is not the ending. She is the echo. And if you want to escape the labyrinth of projection, you must first rebel against the mythology that built it. This is your rebellion. Not with fists, not with hate, but with awareness. Begin here. Withdraw the projection. That glowing image of the one, the soulmate, the feminine salvation. That wasn't her. That was your anima, your lost softness, your suppressed emotional life, your unclaimed creativity projected outward onto someone who never asked to carry it. When you projected your soul onto her, you gave her your power, and now you reclaim it. This is not the same as detachment. Detachment is often cowardice in disguise. This is deeper. This is integration. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. And no man becomes whole while his self-worth hangs from someone else's approval. You must enter the cave, not to find her, but to find you. Who is that? The man who doesn't need to be chosen to feel real. The man who doesn't beg love to fix his brokenness. The man who doesn't seduce with performance, but who magnetizes with presence. But this path isn't intuitive. It is radical, counter-evolutionary. It defies the will that Schopenhauer said governs all life: the will to reproduce, to continue, to possess. To break free is to look that primal instinct in the face and say, no, I will not be your puppet anymore. You begin to recognize the hooks, the biological impulse disguised as passion, the scarcity narrative that tells you if you don't act now, you'll die alone. The social conditioning that says a man without a woman is incomplete. You don't shame these. You witness them, you name them, and in naming them, you take back what they've been feeding on your unconscious energy. And then something shifts. You begin to create without needing it to impress her. You begin to dress, speak, think, and move not for seduction, but for sovereignty. You begin to view women not as prizes, not as proof of value, but as people. And ironically, only then, only when you stop trying to win them, do some begin to gravitate toward you. But you don't care the way you once did, because your selfhood is no longer up for trade. You've learned what Viktor Frankl called the last human freedom: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And your way? It doesn't chase validation. It radiates clarity. It doesn't beg to be loved. It embodies self-love so deeply that love from another becomes a compliment, not a condition. Look to the ones who've walked this path before you, Nietzsche, who walked alone through Europe with madness as his companion, but never betrayed his truth for societal comfort. Jung, who stared into the abyss of his unconscious and emerged with mythologies reborn. Schopenhauer, who turned his back on the illusion of romance and wrote, with brutal grace, about the traps that still snare modern man. These men weren't anti-woman. They were pro-reality. They refused to be seduced by cultural hypnosis. And that's your task now: not to withdraw from life, but to return to it unhypnotized. But rebellion isn't just avoidance, it's reconstruction. You must build new pathways of intimacy, ones that begin with yourself. Ask, what do I actually need? What do I actually feel when I strip away the story of conquest and loss? What kind of love would emerge if I were no longer trying to survive through it? These are not easy questions. They are scalpel sharp, but they are necessary. Because if you answer them honestly, you begin to rewrite the script. And in that rewriting, Woman is no longer an idol to be worshipped, nor an enemy to be feared. She becomes human. And so do you. This is the rebellion. Not a movement, not a dogma, but a remembrance that you were never born to be seduced by shadows. You were born to see. And when you finally do, the game dissolves. Not because you beat it, but because you stepped outside it. So what's left? Then, if not the chase, if not the dream, if not the role you've played since before you had language, what remains? Let's go there. To the truth behind the illusion, to the final realization that reshapes everything you thought love, desire, and woman were supposed to be. Imagine walking through the ruins of every belief you once held about love. The pedestal shattered, the myth of the soulmate burned away. The story that told you happiness lives in her hands, erased, and yet, you're still standing. You thought that without the dream, there would be nothing. But now, in the ash and silence, a deeper truth begins to emerge. Not the truth society sells you, not the romantic narrative Schopenhauer dismantled, but the quiet, brutal, liberating truth that lives beneath all of it. You were never chasing her. You were always chasing yourself. All those late-night obsessions, all the games you played to be noticed, all the pain of being ignored, discarded, forgotten. It was never about her. She was the vessel, the mirror, the spark that set fire to a longing buried so deep you forgot it had nothing to do with sex, or approval, or touch. You wanted to be seen, not by another, but by your own soul. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he spoke of the will, that blind force inside every living thing that claws toward life. It drives hunger, sex, survival, but it also drives suffering. Because it never stops. It uses you. It moves you like a puppet. It whispers, chase her and you'll be whole. Sleep with her and you'll be free. Own her and you'll finally be real. But none of it was true. You never escaped the will you fed it. You called the hunger love, and the loss heartbreak, but it was all part of the same cycle, the illusion of fulfillment through possession. Here's the final paradox. You become free the moment you stop seeking freedom in another. Because the love you were searching for doesn't live in her gaze. It doesn't come from her touch. It doesn't rest in being chosen. It lives in the one thing you've avoided since the beginning: stillness. The kind of stillness that hurts at first, that forces you to feel the rawness underneath the chase, that confronts you with the terrifying possibility that there is no one coming to rescue you, that the hunger will never be satisfied by someone else. But in that terrifying space, something happens. You start to breathe differently. You start to see her not as fantasy, but as human. You stop needing her to complete you, and you begin the real work, the slow, honest, inward return to wholeness. This is individuation. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And who are you? Truly, not a seducer, not a beggar, not a shadow chasing reflections. You are the one who sees. You see the illusion for what it is. You see the biological programming for what it does. You see your pain not as failure, but as an invitation. Because the ache was never there to destroy you. It was there to wake you, to pull you out of the trance, to guide you back to the only love that doesn't disappear when she does your own. Not ego love, not narcissism, but the quiet, grounded presence of a man who needs nothing, and from that nothingness offers everything, not as transaction, not as strategy, but as truth. This is the final realization. She was never the answer. You were never the question. You were the source. And now that you see it, everything changes. You don't stop loving. You love more deeply, but without attachment, without illusion, without slavery to outcome. You connect, not to be saved, but to share. You give, not to be validated, but because it is your nature to overflow. You walk away when it no longer aligns, not because you're angry, but because you're whole. You are no longer possessed by the will. You are no longer chasing shadows. You are no longer projecting your soul onto someone who was never meant to carry it. You are here, present, free, and from that place, something remarkable happens. You start creating again, writing again, breathing again, feeling again, not as a means to an end, but as a way of being. You become magnetic, not because you try to be, but because you are no longer fragmented. You are no longer lost in someone else's body, story, or silence. You have come home, to the fire beneath the lust, to the soul beneath the survival, to the man beneath the mask. So let me leave you with this. When you look at her now, what do you see? A prize to win, a threat to fear, or a human just like you searching for the same wholeness you now carry within? And more importantly, can you finally stop chasing the feminine? Long enough to feel the one that has always lived inside you, because the Anima is not a woman. It is your forgotten soul, and the moment you remember her, you remember yourself. Now breathe. Stay here. Feel it. Not the craving, the clarity. This is what freedom feels like.